She was just another corporate pilot flying business executives across the country. Nobody suspected her secret past. But when an emergency struck and F-22 Raptors scrambled to respond, military pilots heard her on the radio and revealed the shocking truth. She was Eagle One, America's most legendary fighter pilot who had vanished 7 years ago. Before the full story, comment below which country you're watching from. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun was bright over Denver International Airport. Sarah Chen walked around the small business jet, checking everything carefully. She was 34 years old and worked as a corporate pilot. Her uniform was simple and clean. Nobody looked at her twice. She was just another pilot doing her job. Sarah worked for Mountain Executive Aviation. She flew rich business people across America. The work was easy and quiet. Nobody asked questions about her past. Nobody cared where she learned to fly. She was simply Captain Chen, the reliable pilot who always got people to their destination safely. Inside the airport terminal, 3 business executives were waiting for their morning flight to Los Angeles. They barely noticed the woman who would fly them across 4 states. To them, Sarah was just a professional pilot who probably learned to fly at some regular flight school. Her co-pilot today was Mark Rivers. He was 26 years old and had been flying corporate jets for 2 years. Mark liked working with Sarah because she was always calm and made flying look easy. He once asked her where she got her training. Sarah gave him a simple answer about a flight school in Texas and building hours over the years. Mark believed her and never asked again. The passengers got on the jet and sat down in the comfortable leather seats. Sarah went through all her checks in the cockpit. Her hands moved quickly and smoothly over the controls. She had done this 1,000 times. The 2 engines started perfectly. Sarah spoke to the passengers over the speaker system with the usual announcement about the flight. She drove the jet to the runway and got permission from the tower to take off. The jet picked up speed and lifted into the Colorado sky. The takeoff was smooth and perfect. It was exactly the kind of professional flying that passengers never even noticed. Sarah leveled the jet at 37,000 feet and turned on the autopilot. The morning flight was going exactly as planned. The sky was clear over the Rocky Mountains. The weather report said perfect conditions all the way to Los Angeles. She watched her instruments carefully and talked to air traffic control in a calm voice. Mark was looking at the arrival procedures for Los Angeles. The passengers were working on their laptops in the cabin. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. Everything was exactly how Sarah wanted it. She had built this quiet life over the last 7 years. She worked hard to keep it this way. But the peaceful morning was about to change in a way Sarah never expected. Her radio suddenly crackled with an urgent message from Denver Center. The air traffic controller's voice sounded tense. He was sending an emergency message to all aircraft in the area. An unknown aircraft had entered restricted military airspace near the Rocky Mountain region without permission. The aircraft was not answering radio calls. Its flight pattern suggested either hostile intentions or serious equipment failure. Sarah's mind automatically started processing the information. Her eyes scanned the sky while her hands stayed steady on the controls. The controller kept talking and the picture got more serious. The unknown aircraft was confirmed to be a small twin-engine plane. It had taken off from an unknown location and was flying erratically toward areas with lots of people. Sarah could hear the stress building in the controller's voice as military fighters were being sent to intercept. She found herself automatically calculating intercept angles and defensive positions. But she kept her aircraft on course and her face showed nothing. Then came the message that would change everything. A new voice came on the emergency frequency. The voice was sharp and authoritative. Sarah recognized it immediately as military fighter communications. The voice said it was Raptor 11, an F-22 fighter jet from the Colorado Air National Guard. The fighter was now flying supersonic to catch the unknown aircraft. Sarah felt her chest tighten when she heard about the F-22. Memories came flooding back. Memories of the aircraft she once knew better than any civilian plane. The fifth-generation fighter jet that was the absolute best in aerial combat. The plane where she had spent the most intense years of her life. Raptor 11 reported seeing the unknown aircraft. He described it as a Beechcraft Baron with visible damage to its tail. The plane was flying in a very unstable way. The F-22 pilot's voice stayed professional but tense. He moved his fighter into position, trying to get the pilot's attention with hand signals since radio wasn't working. Sarah listened with forced calm. But her mind was running tactical calculations from a completely different world. She analyzed the F-22 pilot's approach and thought about the limited options for dealing with an out-of-control aircraft near a major city. The situation got worse fast. Raptor 11 reported that the Baron's pilot appeared to be unconscious or incapacitated. The cockpit was visible through his sensors, but the pilot inside wasn't moving. Meanwhile, the aircraft continued on a path that would bring it dangerously close to downtown Denver within minutes. Denver Center was coordinating emergency responses. They were trying to clear the airspace and alert ground emergency services. But an uncontrolled aircraft was an impossible problem with no good solutions. Then came the moment that would expose everything Sarah had worked so hard to hide. Military Command asked Denver Center to confirm all aircraft currently near the emergency zone. The controller responded with a list of aircraft positions and identifications. When he got to Sarah's jet at flight level 370, he gave the aircraft registration number and the pilot's name from the flight plan. There was a pause in the military communications. Then a different voice came on the frequency. It belonged to Raptor 12, the second F-22 that had been sent as backup. The voice carried clear shock. Denver Center, Raptor 12 requesting confirmation on that last aircraft. Did you say Captain Sarah Chen is flying that citation? The controller confirmed the information with some confusion in his voice. Another pause. Then Raptor 12's voice came back, now filled with disbelief and something like awe. Center, be advised, if that's the Sarah Chen I think it is, you have Eagle 1 in your airspace. Repeat, Eagle 1 is flying civilian corporate at Angels 37. Sarah's hands tightened slightly on the controls. Her face stayed neutral behind her sunglasses. But inside, she felt her carefully built civilian life falling apart. Eagle 1 had been her call sign in another world. A legend among F-22 pilots who talked about her missions with deep respect. She had walked away from that world 7 years ago for reasons that still hurt to think about. She chose the quiet peace of civilian flying over the intense pressure of elite fighter operations. Mark stared at her with complete confusion. Eagle 1. What are they talking about? Raptor 11's voice joined his wingman. The emergency was momentarily forgotten. Eagle 1. The Eagle 1. Sarah Chen, who flew the Pacific Shield missions. Sarah could hear the barely controlled excitement in these younger fighter pilots' voices. They were processing the impossible information that someone they only knew as an almost mythical figure was flying a corporate jet in their airspace. Her passengers had stopped working. They were staring forward toward the cockpit, trying to understand what was happening. Sarah knew she could no longer stay silent. Not when lives were at stake and her identity had been revealed in a way that was disrupting the military response to a real crisis. She pressed her microphone button with firm authority. Her voice took on a different quality. It was the tone of someone who had commanded fighter pilots through situations where hesitation meant death. Raptor Flight, Eagle 1 Actual. Stand down the hero worship and focus on your mission. You have an uncontrolled aircraft heading toward populated areas and you're wasting time discussing ancient history. The transformation was immediate and unmistakable. The pleasant civilian pilot was replaced by the sharp authority of a combat pilot who expected instant obedience. Raptor 11's response came back with renewed focus but also clear respect. Eagle 1, Raptor 1-1, copy that ma'am. Situation is critical. Baron pilot appears incapacitated. Aircraft is on a failing autopilot system. Current trajectory puts it over downtown Denver in 6 minutes. We have authorization for defensive action if necessary, but command is requesting alternatives. Sarah's mind shifted fully into tactical mode. Years of civilian flying fell away. She accessed the training and experience that had made her legendary. She analyzed the situation with the comprehensive awareness that came from countless hours commanding the world's most advanced fighter jet. She questioned Raptor Flight for detailed information on the Baron's exact flight characteristics, engine status, and damage assessment. Her questions showed an understanding of tactical assessment that went far beyond civilian pilot training. Within seconds, Sarah had formed a plan that made the F-22 pilots pause when she explained it. She proposed a coordinated maneuver where the fighters would use their advanced flight control systems to create precisely calculated pressure waves and wake turbulence. This could influence the Baron's flight path. The technique would essentially use the fighter jet's aerodynamic signature to push the uncontrolled aircraft away from Denver and toward empty terrain. The maneuver was theoretical. It was discussed in advanced fighter tactics courses but never actually tried. It required extraordinary precision and deep knowledge of both aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics. Raptor 1-1's response carried both doubt and hope. Eagle 1, that maneuver is extremely dangerous and has never been field tested. Our tactical computers are showing less than 35% success probability. Sarah's response was immediate and carried the weight of experience these younger pilots couldn't match. Raptor, I've used similar techniques in classified operations you don't have clearance to know about. It works if you have the skill and the discipline. I'm talking you through it step by step. You follow my instructions exactly. No improvisation. No hesitation. Understood? The F-22 pilot's attitude transformed completely. Their earlier shock was replaced by focused intensity. They found themselves being commanded by someone whose tactical expertise was even more impressive than her legendary reputation suggested. Sarah's voice took on the rhythm of combat operations. She walked the fighter pilots through the setup. She directed their positioning relative to the Baron with specific altitude, speed, and distance parameters. This revealed her deep understanding of the F-22's flight characteristics. She directed Raptor 1-1 into position ahead and slightly above the Baron. She talked him through the precise power settings and control inputs needed to create the specific wake pattern that would create downward pressure on the smaller aircraft without causing damage. At the same time, she directed Raptor 1-2 to position on the Baron's opposite side. Together, they would create a coordinated pressure envelope that would guide the aircraft's path away from the city. The execution required split-second timing and absolute trust in Sarah's calculations. As she counted down the start sequence, her voice carried the same calm authority that had once guided combat missions through contested airspace. Raptor 1, on my mark, reduce power to 76% and execute a 3-degree nose-up attitude change with a 1.5 second hold. Raptor 2, you'll mirror the maneuver 4 seconds later on the opposite side. The pressure differential will change the Baron's heading approximately 7 degrees if I've calculated correctly. The F-22 pilots acknowledged with tight voices. Then Sarah gave the mark with the decisiveness of someone who had made life-and-death calls countless times before. Raptor 1-1 executed the maneuver with precision. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then sensors showed the Baron's nose shifting. Not dramatically, but enough to change its path exactly as Sarah had predicted. The invisible pressure wave from the F-22's wake acted like a giant invisible hand, pushing the smaller aircraft into a different flight path. Raptor 1-2 executed his part of the sequence 4 seconds later. The combined effect steered the Baron away from its collision course with Denver, sending it instead toward empty grassland where an uncontrolled landing would hurt nobody. But Sarah wasn't finished. Her tactical mind was already several steps ahead. She directed the fighters through additional pressure manipulations that further refined the Baron's path toward the best possible crash site. At the same time, they were reducing its airspeed. She was essentially flying the uncontrolled aircraft remotely, using the F-22s as her control surfaces. The display of aerodynamic mastery and tactical aviation left everyone monitoring the frequency in awe. The Baron touched down roughly but survivably in the grassland. Emergency response teams reached it quickly. They extracted the pilot who had suffered a medical emergency but was alive. The outcome was as successful as anyone could have hoped for. It was achieved through a tactical aviation technique that would immediately be classified and studied. Raptor 11's voice came through with barely controlled emotion. Eagle 1, that was the most incredible piece of flying I've ever seen, and you weren't even in the aircraft. How did you know that would work? Sarah's response carried a hint of the weight she had carried for years. Because I've done similar in worse conditions when failure wasn't an option. You did good work, Raptor Flight. Mark was staring at Sarah with his mouth open. The passengers in the cabin were completely silent, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Denver Center's controller addressed Sarah directly. His voice carried confusion. Citation November 7:35 Bravo, was that really you coordinating that operation? Are you former military? Sarah considered her response carefully. She knew that the exposure she had dreaded for 7 years was now complete. Denver Center, affirmative. I have prior military experience. Requesting clearance to continue to Los Angeles as filed. But Raptor 11 cut through with unmistakable pride. All stations, Raptor 11. Captain Sarah Chen is former United States Air Force, call sign Eagle 1. She was one of the first operational F-22 pilots and flew classified air superiority missions that shaped how the Raptor is used today. She's credited with multiple air-to-air victories and tactical innovations that are still classified. Finding out she's been flying corporate jets is like discovering a championship race car driver has been driving a taxi. The radio exploded with responses as the revelation spread through the aviation community. Commercial airline pilots expressed disbelief. Military pilots struggled to understand why a legendary combat pilot had walked away. Controllers pieced together the impossible truth. Sarah maintained her composure. She acknowledged clearance to continue to Los Angeles and returned her attention to flying the jet as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But she could feel the weight of 7 years of carefully maintained secrecy collapsing around her. Mark finally found his voice. You flew F-22s. You were a fighter pilot. Why didn't you ever tell me? Sarah kept her eyes on the instruments. Because I left that world, Mark. And the only way to actually leave was to become someone different. The descent into Los Angeles was textbook perfect. Her landing was precise in ways that suddenly made complete sense given her background. The passengers exited quickly. Their earlier casual confidence was replaced by uncomfortable awareness. Sarah's phone began buzzing constantly during the turnaround. Messages were flooding in from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Former squadron members, military public affairs officers, aviation reporters who sensed a major story. Sarah ignored them all. She focused on preparing for the return flight to Denver. When she landed back in Denver that evening, 2 black SUVs with military plates were waiting on the runway. A colonel emerged from the first vehicle in full dress uniform. His face showed both professional concern and personal respect. Captain Chen, or should I say Major Chen, we need to talk. Sarah stood her ground. Sir, with respect, my service ended 7 years ago by mutual agreement. What happened this morning was an emergency response to save civilian lives, not a demonstration that I'm ready to return to military operations. The colonel nodded. I understand, Major. But you should know that what you accomplished this morning created what they're calling a tactical breakthrough. The F-22 community wants you back. They're prepared to offer you a position at the weapons school as chief instructor for advanced tactics. Sarah felt the old pull. The temptation of returning to the world where she had excelled. But she also remembered why she had left. Sir, I'm honored. But my answer is no. I left because I was becoming someone defined entirely by classified missions and a call sign that made normal life impossible. A lieutenant colonel stepped forward. Major Chen, I'm Colonel Rebecca Martinez, 140th Wing Commander. Those are my pilots you just saved from a mission kill situation. What if you worked with us as a civilian contractor? Come in periodically to conduct advanced instruction without rejoining the military. You could maintain your civilian career. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang with a call from Mountain Executive Aviation. The conversation was brief and professional. But the message was clear. They were placing her on administrative leave while they consulted legal counsel about the complications her background created. Sarah ended the call and looked at Colonel Martinez. It seems my civilian career just ended. Martinez's expression softened. You're in an impossible position now. You can't go back to anonymous flying. Take the contractor position, at least temporarily, while you figure out what comes next. Sarah found herself nodding slowly. Colonel, I'll accept your contractor offer on a trial basis. One advanced tactics course, then we reassess. The following weeks brought the full reality of Sarah's exposure. Her story spread through aviation and military communities. It generated media attention she had spent 7 years avoiding. She declined all media requests and focused on preparing the advanced tactics course. The course brought Sarah back into military instruction with an intensity she had both missed and feared. She worked with carefully selected F-22 pilots, teaching them principles that went beyond standard tactics. She shared insights about the fighter's capabilities that came from pushing the aircraft to its absolute limits. The pilots absorbed her instruction hungrily. Sarah felt satisfaction she hadn't experienced in civilian flying. This work genuinely mattered. She was shaping the future of air superiority operations. Colonel Martinez observed Sarah's conflicted state. She approached her after a particularly intense training session. Major, I can see you're struggling. Are you running from military aviation because you don't want to do it, or because you think you're not supposed to want it after choosing to leave? The question forced Sarah to confront motivations she hadn't fully examined. Martinez continued. Maybe you're creating a false choice. Deciding you have to be entirely Eagle One or entirely the corporate pilot, when maybe the truth is you're both. The contractor work gives you space to contribute without being owned by military service. Sarah considered the words, recognizing truth in them. Maybe accepting that Eagle One existed in how she analyzed situations, regardless of what uniform she wore, represented a path forward. The advanced tactics course concluded with recognition that Sarah had fundamentally transformed how the participating pilots understood their aircraft. Martinez offered an ongoing contractor position with clearly defined parameters. Quarterly instruction periods that would allow Sarah to maintain civilian flying while contributing to military aviation education. Sarah accepted with more peace than she had felt since that morning over Colorado. She also accepted a position with a small cargo operation based in Alaska. She would fly supplies to remote communities in demanding conditions. The work was unglamorous but satisfying. Her background was known, but it mattered less in places where people judged you by whether you showed up when weather kept other pilots grounded. The balance wasn't perfect. The visibility she had never wanted remained permanent. But Sarah gradually made peace with the reality that Eagle One and Sarah Chen were both authentic parts of who she was. She flew F-22 simulators quarterly and conducted guest instructor flights. She shared expertise that shaped the next generation of fighter pilots. And she flew cargo through Alaskan winters that tested skills in ways combat had prepared her for. Years passed. Sarah's story became part of fighter pilot culture. The legend of Eagle One, who left military service at her peak. Whose extraordinary capabilities were revealed during an emergency that required exactly the skills she possessed. Young F-22 pilots entering the program heard her name during their initial tactical briefings. They studied maneuvers she had pioneered during classified operations. They watched carefully edited footage of her instructional sessions where she demonstrated principles that pushed the fighter beyond what most pilots believed possible. In ready rooms of F-22 squadrons across the United States and Allied nations, Eagle One's call sign achieved almost mythical status. But what made Sarah's legend particularly powerful was the human dimension her exposure had revealed. The fact that someone capable of operating at the absolute pinnacle of military aviation had chosen to walk away. Had found the courage to build a different life, even when it meant hiding extraordinary capabilities behind the appearance of ordinary civilian operations. The quarterly instruction periods Sarah conducted at various Air Force bases became highly sought-after assignments. She would arrive quietly, often flying herself in whatever cargo plane she happened to be operating. She would spend intense weeks working with small groups of elite pilots. Her instruction went beyond technical maneuvers and tactical procedures. She taught the psychological and cognitive aspects of operating at the edge of human capability, where split-second decisions determined whether missions succeeded or failed. Sarah discovered that teaching these younger pilots provided satisfaction different from but equally meaningful as her own operational flying. She was shaping the future of tactical aviation in ways that would ripple through decades of operations. The work required her to remain current with F-22 developments and continuously expand her understanding of the aircraft's evolving capabilities. Regular simulator sessions and occasional flights in the fighter reminded her viscerally of why she had loved that aircraft, despite the costs it had demanded. But equally important to Sarah's sense of wholeness was the cargo flying that occupied most of her time. Flying a loaded Cessna Caravan through mountain passes in winter storms. Navigating by visual reference when GPS signals became unreliable. Landing on gravel strips that required judgment and skill rather than automation. This flying connected her to fundamental aviation principles in ways that even F-22 operations didn't capture. The people in remote Alaskan villages knew her as Sarah, the cargo pilot who could be counted on when weather grounded everyone else. They treated her with straightforward appreciation, valuing competence without being overwhelmed by reputation. 3 years after her exposure, Sarah was flying supplies to a village in the Brooks Range during marginal weather. She encountered another emergency. A medevac helicopter carrying a critically injured hunter had been forced to land on a frozen lake due to severe icing. They were 40 miles from the nearest medical facility. Sarah heard the distress call and immediately calculated that her caravan could reach the stranded helicopter and extract the patient. But she would have to attempt a landing on the frozen lake in conditions that violated safety protocols. The decision required exactly the kind of risk assessment that had characterized her most challenging F-22 missions. Weighing probability of success against consequences of failure. Accepting that some situations demanded action despite uncertain odds. She diverted to the coordinates, descended through deteriorating visibility, and executed an approach to the frozen lake that drew on every bit of her tactical flying experience. The landing was rough but successful. Sarah coordinated with the helicopter crew to transfer the injured hunter into her aircraft. She made rapid weight and balance calculations while preparing for a takeoff that would push her heavily loaded caravan to its limits. The departure required every foot of available ice surface and a climb angle that left almost no margin for error. But she flew the aircraft with precision that came from years of operating at the edge of capability. She delivered the patient to Fairbanks, where advanced medical care saved his life. The incident received regional news coverage that briefly reminded people of Sarah's military background. But what struck her as significant was how naturally she had drawn on capabilities from both worlds. The tactical decision-making from her F-22 experience combined with practical bush flying skills she had developed during cargo operations. She hadn't been thinking of herself as Eagle One or civilian pilot Sarah Chen. She had simply been an aviator with specific capabilities, responding to a situation where those capabilities made a difference. The integration she had been working toward for years was becoming unconscious and natural rather than something she had to consciously navigate. Mark, who had remained her friend despite the initial shock, commented during one of their occasional phone conversations that Sarah seemed more at peace with herself. "You know, I used to think something was off when we flew together," he said. Not bad. Just like you were holding something back. But now I think maybe you were trying to figure out who you were when you weren't being defined by what you could do in a fighter jet. Seems like you figured it out. His observation was accurate. Sarah appreciated that someone who had known her during the years when she was struggling could see the evolution that had occurred. She had stopped viewing Eagle 1 and Sarah Chen as competing identities requiring her to choose between them. She recognized they were both authentic expressions of who she was in different contexts. The quarterly F-22 instruction wasn't a compromise. It was meaningful work she chose because it mattered and because she was uniquely qualified to do it. The cargo flying wasn't an escape from her capabilities. It was equally meaningful work that connected her to different communities and allowed her to use her skills in ways that served immediate human needs. The media attention that had initially felt overwhelming gradually faded as her story became part of aviation history rather than breaking news. She remained a figure of interest to aviation enthusiasts and military historians. But she had learned to set boundaries that protected her privacy. She gave occasional interviews to responsible journalists. She participated in select aviation conferences where her presence could contribute to serious discussions about pilot training and tactical innovation. But she maintained space to live without constant scrutiny. Colonel Martinez, who had become something close to a friend, once asked Sarah whether she had any regrets about how things unfolded after the F-22s revealed her identity. "Do you ever wish you had stayed completely hidden?" Sarah thought carefully before responding. "There are days when I miss the simplicity of being anonymous. But honestly, I think I was hiding from myself as much as from others during those corporate pilot years. The exposure forced me to stop pretending that Eagle 1 wasn't part of who I am. That integration, even though it was painful, ultimately made me more whole." Now, sitting in the cockpit of her Cessna Caravan on a clear autumn morning, preparing to depart from a small village after delivering supplies, Sarah felt contentment that had eluded her during the years when she was trying to be only one version of herself. The villagers waved as she started the engine. Their friendliness was uncomplicated by knowledge of her military background. She would fly this cargo route for another week, then head south to conduct an F-22 tactics course at Nellis Air Force Base. She was moving between these different worlds with fluidity that no longer felt like contradiction, but rather like natural expression of someone who contained multitudes. The morning the F-22s had revealed her identity had felt like the destruction of everything she had carefully constructed during 7 years of civilian life. But time had shown her that what seemed like destruction had actually been revelation in the truest sense. Not just revealing her identity to others, but revealing to herself that she didn't have to choose between different parts of who she was. She could be the legendary fighter pilot whose innovations shaped modern tactical aviation. She could be the bush pilot who delivered supplies to remote villages. She could be the instructor who helped younger pilots understand what excellence demanded. She could be all of these things because they were all authentic expressions of capabilities and values that defined her. As Sarah advanced the throttle and felt the caravan accelerate down the gravel strip, lifting smoothly into the crystalline Arctic air, she smiled with genuine peace. Eagle 1 would always be part of her story. But so would Sarah Chen, the cargo pilot. And so would all the other versions of herself that she continued to discover and develop. The F-22s had revealed who she really was. But what they revealed turned out to be more complex, more human, and ultimately more complete than the simple legend of a combat pilot who had walked away. They revealed a woman who had the courage to excel at the highest levels. The wisdom to recognize when excellence came at unsustainable cost. And the strength to build a life that honored all of who she was, rather than sacrificing parts of herself to maintain a simpler but less authentic narrative. And in the end, that was the most legendary thing about her after all.